Hello, I'm going to talk to you today about NASA's Food Security and Agriculture program known as NASA Harvest. My name is Alyssa Whitcraft. I'm the Deputy Director and Program Manager of NASA Harvest, and I am joined on the Harvest leadership team by Inbel Becker-Chef, who is the Executive Director, and Chris Justice, who is the Chief Scientist. So NASA Harvest is operated as a multi-sectoral consortium of over 50 members from public, private, NGO, intergovernmental, humanitarian sectors. Anyone basically who touches agriculture and the agricultural value chain or is really impacted by food insecurity. Our objective is really to enable and enhance awareness, use, and adoption of satellite Earth observations by both public and private organizations alike for the benefit of food security and agriculture, both in the US and worldwide. I mentioned we're operated as a consortium, but that consortium is led by the University of Maryland. The Harvest Hub is located there with partners spread around the world. All of our efforts are driven by stakeholder and end user needs. And sort of, we generally don't do much foundational research, but we take things out of the foundational research domain and move them to be ready for operational use. And we including doing the capacity development and methods transfer. So this is a little schematic that kind of shows how Harvest is working. We really aim to improve 3 impact areas: agricultural land use, sustainability, and productivity. And the way that we do that is by advancing both the underpinning methods and by creating products about crop and crop type mapping, crop statistics, crop yield, crop condition, and cropping practices. And we do that in a variety of regions with different partners in agricultural industry, markets and trade, food security early warning communities, and then supporting global policy frameworks like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, UNFCCC, and Geogram, which I'll touch on in depth a little bit later. We work globally from field to national and beyond scales, but we have special focus areas in the US and then also in Eastern and Western Africa. And because we're NASA's program, we do focus on integrating all of NASA's investments that are relevant to agriculture. So trying to make sure new missions are adoptable and usable by the remote sensing, the agricultural community. And we try and drive forward the R&D agenda so that we can take agricultural monitoring where it really needs to go. We have, at this point, over 30 active funded projects with 50 partners around the world, like I said, from multiple industries. I can't touch on nearly all of them, but I will talk a little bit about initiatives that we specifically have around sustainable and regenerative agriculture and around what we're doing to support markets and trade and food security and early warning. So right now, it's sort of the wild, wild west in this sort of sustainable agriculture world. Anybody can make any claim about the way in which they manage land being sustainable, because there's no, regulation, and even more importantly than regulation, there's not a real sense of what should be changed and how we should measure it. So of course we sort of know that practices like no-till, cover cropping, and structural conservation management practices are really valuable for soil health, but we don't necessarily understand the nuances within them and how their impact varies across different sort of agroecological systems. And then also we don't really know how to measure it. So, there have been really excellent studies at field scale, subfield scale, and at the most generally catchment scales, but there hasn't been sort of any comprehensive look at both detecting the practices as well as what their impacts are, not just on soil health or not just on crop productivity, but also on soil health and of course the buzzwords carbon sequestration. So we see remote sensing as having huge potential here. It can reveal the impacts at scale and tell us where certain practices are most and least helpful. This is an example of work coming out of Stanford, which is a part of the NASA Harvest program, where field scale tillage intensity maps were generated alongside field scale yield maps over many, many years. And then Jill Dines combined them and did an integrated look to see what happens when you do use conservation tillage, what happens to yields. She found that after about 11 years was when you saw the positive yield impact, but you'll notice in the spots in the blue is where there actually is some negative yield impacts. And she found that the largest driver of variability had to do with the underlying soil conditions. And so as we kind of go to push farmers toward adopting different practices, there has to be a really good reason for them to do it. And they have to understand, is it really going to work for me in the place that I want it to? So echoing that point, no one's going to change the way they farm without a really good reason. So how can we incentivize private landowners and operators to shift their practices? This is where the need for clear metrics is underlined with sort of an extra thick marker, because you really can't value what you can't measure. And it's hard to measure what you can't see. And so we know there is value from an ecological standpoint, from the consumer's point of view. They're saying they would like to buy and pay a premium for, environmentally sustainable products. But these reasons include increased, for farmers to change their practices, include increased revenue, either through, increasing yield or payments for ecosystem services, through reducing risk or reducing costs to the farmers. But the challenge is that we don't have the measurements at scale to carry it out. We really need better information at every level in the agricultural value chain, from inputs through consumers, really, in order to empower the transition of farming to regenerative and practices with net negative emissions. And so to do that, we need information that is evidence-based, robust, synoptic, objective, and timely. And those are all keywords that describe remote sensing. So that's why we're launching NASA Harvest Sustainable and Regenerative Agriculture Initiative. And it's really aimed at enhancing and standardizing the methods for detection of management practices and analysis of the impacts of these practices on those good reasons on the last page, these agricultural key performance indicators. So why farmers might want to change land use practices. And this is just getting headed off, or just about to get started, so you'll have to stay tuned for more info. Pivoting a little bit, I want to go, that was sort of the farm level topic of importance, and this is really sort of the global look. In 2011, after a series of price spikes, the G20 endorsed a program known as Geogram that was really aimed at utilizing satellite-based Earth observations for bringing transparency to food supply and hopefully having a calming effect on markets and food price volatility. We've been pretty successful in that domain in our partnership with a bunch of national economists known as AMIS. And they've updated our mandate to also include food security, because these items go hand in hand. And so NASA really focuses, or not NASA, excuse me, Geogram really focuses on kind of the whole operationalization of satellite data cycle. So from the coordination of data, making sure that we have the necessary acquisitions, the access to the data at the correct pre-processed level, and ensuring that we have continuity. So if national systems make investments in a remote sensing-based statistics system, they don't just not have data to input into it the next year. So we work closely with the space agencies through CEOS on that. We have an international research and development site network, and where we're intercomparing methods across different landscapes and converging on best practices and preparing sort of the operational community for new data streams and new methods through doing capacity development at every level for Earth observations. And the end goal is really strengthening monitoring systems from national to global scales. NASA Harvest is NASA's contribution to Geogram. On the right, I've listed some of the roles that we play in the program, and we view this as an extremely important component of advancing food security globally. This is one of our most visible impacts of Geogram, and it is led and coordinated by NASA Harvest, but it would not exist simply if it weren't for the over 40 partners that we have internationally who provide their expert opinion and analyses into these monthly bulletins on crop condition outlooks. So this is a look at the 2 crop monitor bulletins combined together geographically that we put out each month. The crop monitor for AMIS and the crop monitor for early warning. We use sort of a stoplight annotation that's very simple to understand for policy, markets, and early warning communities alike. but you know, has the depth of remote sensing rigor and field data observations that underpin it. And like I said, we put this out monthly, started in 2013 in response to the G20 mandate that we had. We work closely with an economics community known as AMIS, Agricultural Market Information System, to generate these reports monthly. That's the crop monitor for AMIS. But out of that success, we also have the crop monitor for early warning, which provides sort of a similar infrastructure, similar data, and similar means of reaching international consensus on the conditions. And yet it's focused on countries that are at risk of food insecurity, and it focuses on their regionally relevant crops and the drivers that might impact crop conditions. And it's been used to inform decisions about allocation of aid, food aid, and resources by national and governments and humanitarian organizations alike. This is another example of how this work has sort of spun into enriching national systems. So the previous look was more of a global look, but we've adapted the crop monitor and many of the underpinning data systems for national governments to utilize as well. This is a case from Uganda in which a modified version of the crop monitor and some of the underpinning global agricultural monitoring tools demonstrated that there was sort of severe drought in an area that is commonly impacted by acute food insecurity. And in the past, the government was reacting. As soon as the crop had failed, they were reacting, and people were already out of money and didn't have food to eat, and it was really a crisis. But because they had satellite data very early in 2017, they were actually able to act proactively, saving them a lot of money in the process, and much more importantly, ensuring that people didn't reach the level of crisis. They had money to buy food, to buy new seeds, to start a new season, and to make it out the other side, to farm another day. Of course, the big topic on all of our minds this year is COVID. And a lot of governments are sort of operating in the dark about what's going on because they can't do their usual data collection that they do. And so this is an example from Togo. They approached NASA Harvest and said, look, we need to know exactly where our farmers are, and we kind of don't know that in order to give out our aid program. And so we didn't have a lot of field data to train a crop map. And so our partners at Planet mobilized very quickly within 48 hours to provide us a lot of data that we used to visually train machine learning models that were run on Sentinel-2 to develop in just 10 days a 10-meter national scale cropland map that the government now uses. And I'll skip ahead because I think I'm getting a little tight on time, but just to say that this has also been useful in the US and also in Russia, where there's been some uncertainty about planted area and what will be harvestable. We don't have the ability to do the crop tours that we have in past years, and this year we're relying heavier than ever on remote sensing. Another example, again in the COVID domain, Esteban Copati is a good partner of ours at the Buenos Aires Grain Exchange. He's an agricultural economist who's seen the value of remote sensing. And he's used our global agricultural monitoring system, which is part of sort of NASA Harvest's repertoire of open data platforms that enable people to have open access to satellite data to inform their decisions. And he saw that although they knew there were some dry conditions in the northern part of Argentina, they weren't aware just how severe it was. And it was even drier than the severe drought that was 2018. And so he tweeted this out, got a lot of traction. And now La Nación, which is one of the most important newspapers in Argentina, a journalist has been trained on this tool as well, trained by Esteban, no less. And so this tool that was initially sort of, and is commonly used by remote sensing experts to be able to develop time series of remotely sensed data, it's even usable by journalists with no remote sensing training. So this is really kind of what it's all about, bringing the data or bringing the users to the data in ways that are easily comprehensible and impactful for them. So I want to thank you very much for your attention today. Please see more at nasaharvest.org, follow us on Twitter at nasaharvest, or reach out directly if you have any specific questions.